Welcome everyone, we're glad you could come. I'm Mara Keller, core faculty in Women's Spirituality, and this is Loleta Collins, our doctoral student who will be defending her dissertation today, which is Scathach, an exegesis of an Iron Age warrior woman of Ireland. Well, to say it perfectly, an exegetical study of Iron Age Ireland's warrior woman. And I want to introduce the committee. I'm the doctoral chair for the committee, and Alka Aurora, core faculty in Women's Spirituality, is the CIS, a member of the committee, and Brian Ellison, who is from Urbana University, where he is chair of humanities and also a professor of English, is the third member of the committee. So welcome to our committee, and to Loleta and to all of you for this. You know, I just want to say that the women's dissertation doctoral defense are a real highlight of our program. It's the culmination of what we've been working for. Our classes are leading up to this. You've worked a couple of years on your own to get to this point, to make your own original contribution of scholarship and transformation for yourself and the world. So we're very happy to have this opportunity to listen to you today. I'm going to let the committee members say, well, why don't you start with just a couple of words of hello. I'll let the committee members introduce themselves and then you can speak.
Okay.
Okay.
Again, I'm Loleta Collins. I'm actually a instructor, adjunct instructor of world religions since 1999, so I can use my teacher's voice so for the cameras to say. I work and live in Ohio, near Dayton area, and if I start to fall asleep, I'm just on a different time zone, just elbow me while I'm talking, we'll be in business, okay? Anything else?
No, that's
okay.
Good. And also, Brian, do you want to say a few more words of introduction for yourself?
Oh, sure, I can do that. As was mentioned before, I'm Brian Elliott. I'm the chair of humanities at Urbana University, and I'm also a professor of English. I generally teach American literature, but I'm also interested in folklore, so this dissertation has been quite interesting for me to read and work with Loleta on. And I have not switched time zones, so if I fall asleep, there is no one here to nudge me, so I'll apologize in advance.
Just don't snore and we'll never know.
Yeah, I'll keep them.
Stay tuned in. And Alka, anything else?
Sure. Well, thank you, Mara, for the introduction. I'm core faculty in the Women's Spirituality program. This is my 6th year at CIS. And I teach in a variety of topics across our program, but particularly a lot around spiritual activism, feminist theory, and some ecofeminism. And I'm actually not an expert in mythology and in Loleta's area exactly, so I've been learning a lot from her research as well, as well as being able to contribute something as well. So it's been a pleasure working with Loleta over the years.
I remember when you were brand new.
Yes.
And if we could just go around the circle one last, so just say your name, that's all.
Annette Williams,
Airdrome,
Lisa Christie, Francis Santiago,
Anna Custis.
Medea Brooke.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. My turn to keep you entertained? Okay. So, my name again is Loleta Collins. I just did a little PowerPoint to back me up and to also help me remember where I'm supposed to be at when I'm talking. So my first slide is Introduction to Scathach. As I've said, I've been teaching for a long time, so I like to put things in PowerPoint to kind of reiterate my point, but my whole collection of my lecture and my talk will not be on the screen. If you need me to repeat anything, please, holler, throw something at me. I usually am really happy with money and food. Just a little heads up on that. So, this is what got this whole thing started. This is actually the title of a book here. Gods and Fighting Men, the story of the Tuatha De Danann and the Fianna of Ireland. You've got to say it fast or nobody will know that you're mispronouncing it. This is arranged and put into verse by Lady Gregory with a preface by W.B. Yeats. I stumbled on this book when I was completing my bachelor's program. Actually, probably longer ago than some of you have been alive. I'm thinking it's been a while. it was one of those fascinating, I couldn't believe there was a title that long in the library, you know, that was just like, whoa, what is this? And it was one of those books that was relegated back to that mysterious void called the depository. So I had to make special requests to get this book, and I'm reading this book, and I never really encountered anything like that because all of the mythology and everything I had dealt with before was Greco-Roman, you know? That stuff that you get from elementary school up, Athena, Apollo, and all of these. And I got into this, and this was so different. And it got me fascinated with Celtic mythology. So I really kind of looked into it and started digging into it further. My little note, I haven't looked back. I've looked to the different sides because I've dabbled on a lot of other mythology since then, but I keep coming back to this because it just is fascinating to me. When I was having the choice of what to focus my dissertation on, I'd gone a variety of different directions. Mara was wonderful at helping me. She was like, well, how about this? And I'm going, and she's like, well, is that really what you want to do? So she was wonderful at helping me find who I needed to focus on. Through focusing and reading on this, I discovered what's called the Táin. The Táin simply means the raid. And there's actually a lot of books called something about the raid. Raiding is a very common tradition, story in this tradition. And this is kind of what led me to what I picked for my dissertation. So I love this picture. I actually managed to get a hold of a 1800s manuscript that includes the Táin Bó Cúailnge. And this is actually the first lines of the book that I focused my dissertation on, in Irish calligraphy. When I started this project, I did not read Irish, let alone Middle or Old Irish. I can dabble my way through it now. Not very well, but better than most people I know. But if you notice, there's obviously quite a bit of a challenge in reading this text. Things I learned, there's specific letters that are written when they're written together. Like this letter right here, and Brian, you can't quite see what I'm pointing at, but if you look at the little head that's hanging off of the art style giant T there on the bottom, it looks sort of like the word M-A-G-A-C-H. That G is actually an S-T in the Irish Gaelic writing. So actually diving in and getting a hold of that actual manuscript was a challenge, to say the least. But that was sort of what I did. Is I did my research, and then I wanted to see the real thing. And I was fortunate enough to actually get a hold of that book and a few others and see the original writing and see the fancy text. And it's very important because if you've got 3 different translations and they've got 3 different spellings, how do you get that? Well, you get that because you're not using normal modern American writing. But that's kind of what started it all, this Táin Bó Cúailnge. So, in the Táin Bó Cúailnge is when I stumbled upon Scathach. This picture at the top of this slide that says Median Scathach, this is Scathach's name in Irish Gaelic, in Mid Old Irish. Now, you talk about trying to pick out her myth out of that story when you're trying to find that to equal that. So Scathach in English doesn't look like Scathach in Gaelic. In the Táin, there's this lovely phrase that says, if he visited Scathach, the Shadowy One, and studied the warrior's art with her, he could be any hero in Europe. And when I first encountered this fascinated me. I kind of found it entertaining. You got the Hebe in Cullen, the great Irish warrior. Biggest Irish hero out there. You know, there's literally statues of him in Ireland. And he has to go to a woman to get his training. I kind of thought that was funny. It's like, finishing school, you got to go learn all the proper ways of doing things. And later when it came back to this, I was like, okay, why do you have to go to a woman? If you're the best around, how is it you are the best, but there's still somebody else, and that somebody else is a woman? And I wanted to know more about her. So I started digging to find out more about her and digging behind the story. So in the story, in the Táin itself, there's not a whole lot. And so you just have to start looking into what's called Rumscully, or foretales, the stories behind the stories, to find out who she is. And that's what I did. I found this woman that's trained the greatest hero, and then nothing else is told about her. I wanted to know who she was. I wanted to know why nothing else is told about her. What happened to this woman? You know, was this the latest, greatest end of her progeny and she's done? I want to see. All right, so the key players in this whole story. We got Scathach again. I put that name up there again. Cúailnge. And I put next to these guys, Cúailnge is from the Ulster province. So in Ireland at this time, there's different provinces, kind of like counties, kind of like Northern Ireland today and the rest of Ireland. Well, in the ancient times, Northern Ireland was the Ulster province. It's still Ulster Ireland today. Slightly different geographical boundaries today as it was then, but essentially the same. Right next door to the Ulster province is the Connacht province. And they're kind of like cousins that don't like each other. So they're constantly, you know, running across the border and nabbing somebody else's goods and coming back and forth. They're constantly going at each other. And that's kind of the setting that's going on with this story. So Cúailnge comes along, and he is the hero of the Ulster stories. Now, Cúailnge's story is the foundation for Scathach. And in this foundation, the two of them are just so tied together, it's just amazing. But there's some strangeness to him because he's that superhero. He's that hero story sort of deal. He's a young guy. He's got sort of an ambiguous parentage. We're not quite 100% sure who his father is. Some people say it's a god. Some people say it was basically one of the local wandering guys. In other words, he's not quite on par with the legitimacy, if you will, of other people. He lucks out because his mom's brother is the king. So he gets the best of everything because he's high-ranking. So he comes along and he's learning the warriors are literally from the king's champions. So he is one of the big players. And again, he is going to go to Scathach to get his final training. In that final training, he meets Scathach's daughter, Luck. That's the U word there. And he meets another warrior woman who Scathach is fighting against named Aoife, which is another little fascinating twist. The other two main players that come along in this story are Queen May and King Alil. And they are on the Connacht side. And they're kind of what starts the final battle. So long before we get to that final battle, the first four people on this list are making everything happen, and that's where we really see Scathach come in and act. I put this picture of 3 Celtic dogs up here. Cúailnge's name means the Smith Cullen dog, the dog belonging to Cúailnge. When he was little, he was late to a feast, and so they'd already put the guard dogs out. And he goes on into the feast, and the guard dogs go after him, so he killed them. He was a little immature, and he got scolded royally for harming these dogs. And so he said, you know, he apologized fiercely for this, and he said, until this, you know, until we get a new batch of dogs trained, I will stay and be your guard dog. And ever since then, he was Cúailnge's dog, or Cúailnge. Scathach's name is fascinating. It means the Shadowy One. And it's fascinating because she was kind of lost to the shadows. The neat little thing about her daughter, Ortha means specter, kind of like a ghost. So it's kind of a neat little family tree there as far as names go. I put this picture on here. This is an old Scottish-style house that's sort of what we would call a bower. And that's kind of, that bower is what they call Scathach supposed to have lived in. What happened in the ancient times is they would have kind of like a little fortress house, and it would usually have like a moat or a lake around it so that it would limit access. In Scathach's story, it says that she had 7 windows to her bower, and each one had doors between it. And so if you look at this picture to kind of see where these windows and how they're laid out, you can kind of get the idea that her house was pretty big. not a small design. So Cuchulainn has to go find Scathach and get his training. And the story goes, he goes to her, he gets the training. He gets the training a little bit by hook and crook. Scathach's daughter basically falls head over heels in love with him. She's like, oh, I like him. He's wonderful. One of my favorite lines from the stories is she comes back to tell, because her mom has sent her out to go check to see who that new guy is coming through. And she comes back and she's kind of like, oh, head over heels in love. And her mom's like, oh, I see you like him. Take him to bed if you like. And, we're going, wait a minute, this was written when? And we've got this woman that's saying, yeah, daughter, go, here's a new stranger. Go ahead, take him to bed, enjoy. It's a little different for our mentality. So, apparently Cuchulainn's not interested in Uvuk. And so she kind of has to tweak his interest a little bit. And she does so by basically saying, I'll tell you how to get mom to do all the training you like if you sleep with me. So a little sneakiness there. Interestingly enough, we don't see any reprisal on Scathach's part for this. So it's almost a little like maybe she expected this, or this was the way things were supposed to go. So Uvuk basically tells Cuchulainn to go out when mom's talking with the gods, because she doesn't carry weapons when she goes. And so essentially the only way Cuchulainn bests Scathach is by catching her unarmed when she's not expecting it, deceitfully, basically. Interestingly enough, later he goes a one-on-one against Iphi, and that's the only way he pulls off beating her is through deceit as well. So he might have been the best warrior, but he couldn't beat the women without being sneaky and underhanded. It's kind of an interesting little trend there. He gets Scathach to agree to three things, which is, sleeping with Scathach's daughter. We're sure Uvuk was okay with that because she was the one who started this whole thing. To get the training from Scathach, and to get a prophecy from Scathach, because Scathach was known to be able to have prophetic visions. So she was a seer, a prophet of some sort. He stays with her from what's apparently a considerable amount of time. Depends on which one you're looking at, but it's at least a year that he's staying there training. In that time frame, it would not have been at all unheard of for a young warrior to stay up to 7 or 8 years with a teacher. So Scathach's training him, and at some point in the training, she goes off to battle Iphi. And she thinks, I guess, Cuchulainn's a little young. Cuchulainn's interesting because he doesn't have a beard. It's commented multiple times. He doesn't have a beard because he's too young. And that's something in the Celtic culture, he's not considered an adult yet. So he's running around doing all these adult things, but he's not grown up. And for possibly that reason, Scathach does not want him to go with her to battle Iphi. So she gives him a sleeping poison that's supposed to keep him out for about 24 hours. He wakes up early, runs and joins the fight. And when it comes down to the fight of the champions, Iphi challenges Scathach to a fight. Cuchulainn says, no, I want to fight her. So he goes to fight her instead. And through deceit, he beats Iphi. And what he demands from her is, basically, you sleep with me, you give me a son, and you give, never fight with Scathach again, and you give her more hostages. And so he gets all of this stuff, and he stays with Iphi until Iphi says, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant, And then he goes back with Scathach on his hostages, and everybody goes home happy as a parent. So after this, he gets a call back from Ulster, Ireland. And by back, part of this is, of course, I went a little out of work here. He has left Ulster to go do this training. The story said he goes to Scotland. He gets a call from Ulster, Ireland to come back. The king needs you, come join us. And he comes back, and before he leaves, he gets the prophecy from Scathach. And this is called Verba Scáthaige, or the words of Scathach. And it is a prophecy about his future. And basically, in the shortest, simplest way, Cuchulainn is going to live fast and die young. That's basically what the prophecy is about. There's other little tidbits and everything to it, but this prophecy is one of the oldest parts of any of the Celtic or the Irish texts. It's one of the oldest written sections, and it's in poetic form. It's entirely poetry, so it's neat, rhythmic approach there. So when I'm doing this study, apart from reading the different versions of this story, I'm coming up with major keywords, and I put these on the screen for major terms. Of course, the first word is Celt, which you guys have all heard of Celtic, that sort of thing. What is a Celt? That's one of the questions I look at. Do we qualify the Irish as Celtic? Do we qualify Scathach as Celtic? For my purposes and my research and deduction, I did. It makes most logical sense. I have a whole chapter on that and how that gets to it and everything else, but the easiest way is we're going to use the word Celt to describe both Cúailnge and Scathach. Excuse me. One of the main terms that really ended up focusing, or my research was banchomarba. That's this lovely word right here. Banchomarba translates to woman heiress, or often called designated daughter. This is a woman who inherits her kingdom from her father, who was a king. In this culture, women inheriting a rule of kingship basically doesn't happen. It's very rare that it would happen, and it would only happen when there were no male heirs. In this case, the family, the clan, if you will, would offer the woman a choice. Your choice is to take a buyout, basically, huge amount of money, and then the community will get together and pick a new ruler. Or you can be the ruler, but you have to be the defender, essentially a female male. You get to be the female king, if you will. And you've got to be the king in all things. Not a queen, a king. You've got to be the male version. That's tied in directly to the povich, because this word, the povich, is the sort of like a dowry system. What we see with this is every couple, husband and wife, coming into a marriage is supposed to supply a nest egg, if you will. So it's not that we're giving Francesca Francis. Not that we're giving Francis a dowry to get rid of her, but we're giving her and her husband, he's bringing money in too, so that they both have something to start with. Now, the fascinating thing is this is all supplied by the clan as a whole. So if you guys end up getting divorced, your money still goes back to the clan. So it's not technically always yours. The goal is we're going to give it to a young couple so that this young couple can use it to increase the clan's wealth. So the whole system is based on a community system and not an individualized system. We see this tied in with the foster system, so that every young boy and young girl, ideally, should be fostered out to somebody else at age 7, and roughly for about 10 years, they're going to go to someplace else. And ideally, it's a flip-flop trade. Sometimes you have to pay, sometimes you don't, totally dependent upon rank and how everything is working. The whole goal between that Kobachi and the foster system both is to keep the power within the clan as a whole. That banchomarba is a worry because when a couple gets married, their children belong to the husband's clan. So if we have a woman who has inherited the rule of the kingdom, her children would then inherit from her and take it to her father's clan, their father's clan, not the family's clan. So there's actual legal codes that we see. This is that Brehon laws you see over here. That's the old Irish legal codes that prohibit a banchomarba from giving any inheritance to her children. So you can rule the community, you can rule as a king, and you can do amazing things. Your children are getting none of it. Everything at your death goes back to your clan. It's kind of a neat little interesting trend that I discovered. I'm like, okay, you can do everything you want, but you don't get any of it, ultimately. A few other words that come up quite a bit. Druid, Philip, Fatih, and Bard. You guys have all heard of Druids before, right? Old guys with white beards and white robes cutting mistletoe with gold knives, right? Yeah, probably not. Right next to the word Philly, I have another little screen print from that text, a photograph I made. This actually reads Van Philly. Van is the Irish word for a woman. And we see in multiple cases of the text references to Van Philly, Van Feth, Van Var, the idea of woman version of them. The fascinating thing is it doesn't have to be on there because these words are not gender specific in Irish. But sometimes we see them when they're added, and we can tell that that's added by our scholars from the Middle Ages. There you go. Because they're the ones that's differentiating, you know, oh, Jessica, well, that must have been a woman. I'm going to put the word woman in front of it. So in the old versions, it doesn't have to have, in some of the old texts you'll find without that in it, and it'll just say, Jessica the Fille. These are parts of the formal religious system of the Celts in French and in England and Ireland. There are not clear-cut differentiations. So they're very fluid in how they mix and match and who does what. If you look and go really, really basic, the druid is kind of like the judge, the philosopher, the teacher, the bigwig on the campus, if you will. The Philid and the Feth are the interesting one because these guys kind of they kind of go between the two. They are maybe one may do each other's job back and forth. There's no real clear-cut differentiation between the two. They are essentially the prophets and the diviners and the ones that dive in to find out what the future is telling. The bards on the last part, oh, one other thing, the Philid and the Feth are what we would see in the Latin text as the Vates or the Ovates, if you've seen that word before. The bard is the historian, and the fascinating, the really fun part, that one's also the one that composes the songs, including the songs that are insults. And these, this particular group of professionals could actually take down kings based on how sarcastic their songs were about things. So it's kind of, you know, you don't really want to mess with them because they'll really insult you, sort of idea. The fascinating thing with that Brehon laws that we look at, these laws go into the Middle Ages, and we see specific legal codes relating to all of these specific roles in Irish legal codes. For example, we know there were specific tax breaks for Druids into the 600s. The File were well into the 1400s, that there were legal codes referring to them. The bards were even later in different places, and they were almost a love-hate relationship, as in working alongside of the Christian clerics to record histories. So we actually have evidence that the bards were there. You know, here's Father or Brother Matthew, and he's working alongside of you know, Patrick, you know, one of the common names there, and they're both collaborating to create those histories for the area. Over on the right-hand column, we mentioned the Brehon laws. Táin Bó Cúailnge, or the back cattle raid of Cúailnge, and it's about, I know this is going to be shocking, it's about stealing cows. Well, technically a bull, but still. Verba Scáthaige, Foglaim Con Culainn, and Tochmarc Emire. Verba Scáthaige is, these are all the foretells, or Ramscali, the ones that build up to the Táin. Verba Scáthaige, the words of Scathach, that's that prophecy that she gives. Foglaim Con Culainn is, this is the training of Culainn, how he gets his training from Scathach. Tochmarc Emire is the wooing of Emire. This is when Culainn is trying to get his wife. He's you know, picking up the girlfriend. And part of that is he has to pick up the girlfriend by getting the training from Scathach. So that was one of basically the challenges. You know, I'll marry you, but you got to prove my wealth. Oh, by the way, my dad, my foster father, won't have anything to do with you. So he's going to set up a trap for you. And that trap was playing on Culainn's ego, basically. You aren't good enough until you get trained by Scott, and thinking that there's no way he'll actually survive the training. It didn't work. He survived, according to the story. So far, so good? Anybody got questions yet? Everybody's remembered how to say all these words, right? Okay. So basically, my short synopsis of my research questions, I wanted to know who this woman was. Who is Scathach? Okay? And then, how is it that this woman is the ultimate teacher for the hero, the warrior? Then I kind of have little other questions. She prophesied his future. So how exactly is she connected to formal religion, the Celts, or religion in general? So where's that connection? How did that happen? Then personally, could I recover her story? What can I find out from digging? And then is she relevant today? So that's kind of what I set out to do, and I did for myself. Hopefully it makes sense for everybody else. We'll get there. All right, standpoint and personal relation to the topic. How do I come in about this, other than being curious? That was the first thing. I was curious. So, personal ancestry. I don't know if you can tell by looking at my skin. My heritage is British Isles. I know I'm a little pale, believe it or not. Up there at the top is one of the Mullins tartans, one of my family tartans. And these are some ancestors of mine. I love this picture on the right. The tall woman in the center, if you go one person to the left, that's my mama. So this is, my family tree comes through that ancestry a long way back. So I've done genealogical research for my family for a long time. I've got one line of Germans, one line of Scots. Everybody else is from one tiny little region of the borderline between Wales and Britain. It's like one generation they're Welsh, the next generation they're English, one generation it's back and forth. They keep hopping back and forth there. Oddly enough, I could not find, and this we changed it a little bit, all the way up to about 2.5, 3 years ago, I could not find any Irish ancestry. Fascinating, because my family lived from this area next to a place called Irishman's Creek, and I couldn't find any Irish. And then I ended up focusing on Irish study. Part of the reason that I picked this and saw a lot of connections here is my family's Appalachian. I'm the first generation of my family born outside of mountains in 500 years. And I still go back every so often. It's sort of like a genetic thing you're connected to. I put a couple pictures up here. This down here is my Uncle Leroy. This is in front of one of the old smokehouses. My mom grew up on a subsistence farm in Appalachia. I spent a huge amount of time. I calculated by the time I was 12, I spent 3 years of my life there. That was how we did it every weekend, back to the farm, that sort of thing. I literally grew up going to the creek to get the water and that lifestyle. My mom wanted us to know what it was like to grow up that hard, so we knew not to go back to it. I thought it was wonderful and loved it, so she was like, I don't know what happened to you. So that was her approach. We have all of these lovely little traditions that we have in our family. And one of them that I love, and that's the reason we have a little cow up here, a couple cows. There was always a cow in the family. Oddly enough, she was always named Bessie. There's only one name. My grandma had multiple cows. They were all Bessie, one after the other, sequentially. And there was always a horse or a mule. My grandmother had the cow. My grandfather had the mule, or the horse. And that was their own personal piece of property. As I'm going through and looking at this farming culture that Cúailnge and Scathach are part of, I kept finding direct parallels to my family's ancestry, all the way down to inheritance laws. Thing that I've been going through, and I'm glad I was sitting down. I probably would have had to take a quick seat otherwise. We had this one little, I'm reading these laws, and it says, the men get the land and the women get the movable property. And I'm like, yeah, that just happened like 30 years ago, 20 years ago in my family. So when my grandparents passed away, all of their sons had the land divided up between them. My mom and her sister got to go take everything out of the house. That was how it was divided up. That was the legal code from about 1,200 years ago. They're still following it at that day. Why? Because that's the way it was always done. So those traditions, as I'm going through this, I kept finding so many of these things that just kept coming through, kept carrying through. And so that was much closer connection to me than I had expected to find. And I kept seeing it over and over again. I'm going to back up one slide here. I'm going to show you this. This is on the far left-hand side. It's my grandpa. My grandpa delivered mail on horse or muleback in Appalachia until 1987, 1988. He was one of the last two men mail carriers that delivered mail by horseback in the country. But this is Dan. He's with one of his mules named Dan here. And that was it. That horse was that part of the family. That was the connection you had to have. And if we look at our Celtic tradition and our traditions with Scathach and Culainn, that was your moneymaker. That was your horse, was where your value and your ritziness came from. And then the rest of your nest egg was that cow. Then had all the rest of the stuff.
What's in the middle here?
In the middle here, okay, this is my great-grandpa, T.G. Cook, and his wife, Lizzie. And I mentioned Lizzie in my paper. Lizzie was known as Old Belle Yo, and that in Appalachian is ewe, as in a female sheep. And she was called Old Belle Yo because she played fiddle. And every time she went anywhere, everybody found out where she was going, and they all followed her to go sit down and play music with her. I don't know what happened to the music gene. It didn't come on my side. Yeah, that is also with that's my great-uncle Arthur in the little chair. And that is the parents over here on the right-hand side, and the lady in the center is my grandma, and that's, so great-grandpa, grandma, mom, and then most of the rest of the family there. My grandma had 9 children. It's a smaller family. The reason for that many children is because you had to have that many to work the fields and grow the food. So, yeah, that's family tree. All ancestors or direct relation, some way, shape, or form. Pretty tough stock, too. Another one part of my standpoint in personal relations to the topic is I have an admiration and fascination with Indigenous religions. I love Indigenous religions. I was raised as a fundamentalist Protestant evangelical Christian. Couldn't stand it. It was not who I was. I tell a little story about, and I can still remember this so well. I was with my father cleaning the meeting house. Heaven forbid you call it a church. I'll be in trouble. We were cleaning the meeting house. I can picture from my height, I was probably about 3.5 foot tall at this time. I don't know. It was like probably 6, 7, 8, something like this. And I got to go in the back room, which was where they had their business meetings. And you don't get to normally go back there. So I get to see it, and I was like, yeah, I can really straighten this up and everything else, and we can really do good when I get old enough to do this. And I'm promptly told, no way, you're a woman, you're not allowed. The only reason you're back here in this room is because you clean it. You know? I got a little insulted. And I still remember trying for a few more years to fit in until it was about 10 or 11, and then I just gave up. That was just not any connection to me. I didn't have a connection to that. And so I started dabbling. Okay, well, everybody else has got religion that they like. Where's the one that I like? And so I started trying out different traditions. And what I learned is that I loved Indigenous religions. So what I really liked is I liked the individual religions that are connected to individual ethnicities. I love to see variety and the beauty of the difference. And I like that Shinto tradition for the Japanese person, and the Native African tradition for the Yoruba, and the Australian Aboriginal for the Australian. I want those variety and differences. But I also recognize that that's not who I am. So I get to look at it from the outsider because I'm not an Indigenous person at this point. I still love and respect it, and the idea is that connection to the natural world, the connection to the land, and probably I would pretty much guarantee it had a lot to do with that subsistence lifestyle that I was kind of drugged through as a little kid. I wouldn't say kicking and screaming because I loved it. Still love it. I put some pictures on this slide. On the right we have a crow carrying an acorn, just kind of a little Celtic in that tradition. Blackbirds were considered prophetic birds in Celtic tradition. The acorn, of course, is the foundation for the oak, which is one of the Celtic major trees, major power players. On the right, because I really like Indigenous traditions, not the right, excuse me, the center, is a picture called peyote. It's a modern artist's version of a Native American peyote ceremony. Just the beauty of that different variety. On the left is taking it a little further back. This is part of my French because I don't speak French well. Roc Portruce. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. This is a shrine found in France. It's a Celtic shrine. And if you look closely, those are indeed severed heads sticking in the shrine. The Celts were known to occasionally hunt and take heads. And that was part of their indigenous religious tradition. We don't see a whole lot of that in Irish traditions. We do see it in the stories, but it's definitely an indigenous tradition. It's just a little different than most of us think about. So I love all of the indigenous traditions, even ones that make you go, whoo, and think of that a little bit more. So bringing that love of enjoyment of those different traditions and kind of finding those indigenous approaches in religions is part of what I really like about that. Another thing that really drives me and pushes me in this particular research is wanting to find powerful women in ancient stories. I love the idea of stumbling across this woman who literally was the teacher of the best heroes out there. Okay, she's a tough lady. Let's find out more about her. I like that. I've got some different pictures up here on the screen. On the left is a depiction of Frigg, who's a goddess out of the Norse tradition. She has the golden apples. In the center is a Siberian shaman. This was taken in, I think, 2007, I think. And in Siberia, female shaman are still common and are very highly revered. I love the picture on the right. It looks like a stereotypical wise woman, right? She's got her staff and everything else. This is my grandmother. And this was, she was at this time, I think she was about 89, 90, something like that. And that's actually my hiking stick. She was out visiting a grave site, and it was a little unsteady, so we're like, here, use the hiking stick to steady yourself. And I turn around and there's this picture of this woman that's the epitome of this strong woman. Now, my grandmother was a perfect lady, okay? She would never say anything bad about anybody. She might think it, but she was very strong in that. She was co-owner with my grandfather of the farm and everything on it. And it was all done equally between the two of them. And if they're going to make a deal, my grandfather was a notorious trader. He loved to trade stuff. But now if it got to be a higher ranking trade, she was called in on the deal. So you had to have that balance there.
Okay, I think you have to maybe skip this. I mean, we're...
Oh, I'm going too fast?
No, you're not going fast enough.
Not fast enough? Okay.
I will started about 20, we have about 20 minutes left.
I can pull that off.
Okay.
I can pull it off. Literature review of Scathach, pretty easy. None. Okay? How's that for fast? Yeah, I cannot find... I was excited. I found a book with her name on it the other day, a couple years ago. I ordered it because there were no references for it. It was a bad fiction book about I don't know, some sort of neo-pagan witch that I don't know where the guy got this ideas, because after the first chapter I just gave up and third one. That's the only thing I can find about her being researched scholastically. So I get to do the first kind of digging in on her to see what I can find out about it. My basic references, where do I find her story? There's basically four. And that's these stories that we looked at before, the Táin Bó Cúailnge and the three Romscali or foretales. So literature review of Scathach is very short. And this is again another picture of one of the old vellum texts there. Literature review for the Celts, good Lord, huge. So I just kind of gave you a little breakdown here. I went in 3 different areas to come up with a good understanding for Scathach. I looked at Celtic studies as a whole, I looked at Celtic women, and I looked at Celtic religions. And I went and give you some examples on this slide of what I was looking at in each specific area. I don't know if there's anything huge in this area that I want to kind of pull out. If you see with the Celtic women and the Celtic religion both, I did pull in a lot from the Brehon laws. I had no idea when I first started studying this material that I would end up dabbling in ancient Irish law, but that became a huge chunk of the work that I ended up doing. We looked at archaeological discoveries because that's kind of what we look at for today for a lot of Celtic stuff. But there is a huge amount out there in Celtic studies. The biggest problem with the literature review for Celts is getting to the good stuff and getting rid of all of the not relevant to your study stuff and this really is not good quality scholarship stuff. So it's weeding out to get to the good stuff that becomes the biggest challenge with this material. There's a lot. What do I bring as far as my disciplinary frameworks? Historical research training. I started my career as a historian. Skepticism. I tell my students I was born a skeptic, but I doubt that. So I look at all of this stuff and I go, well, what are the other options? And what are the other opportunities and things? So I'm bringing that in with everything I'm looking at. And that ties into the exegetical approaches. I want to see what did the writing mean for the people that wrote it? What did the writing mean for the people that were reading it? What does it mean now? Kind of pulling it apart. Again, a little skeptical approach. Women's spirituality, where is that for us? What is this important for us in our own particular women as religious beings? Women's sacred stories is tied into that directly. And through my career at CIIS, I've really kind of fallen into that sacred stories part. It's become a huge part of me anymore, is that women's sacred stories. And I kind of see Scott's story as connected to that. Human hermeneutics of suspicion, that's that skepticism. And I put skepticism again on here because that is part of who I am multiple times. I thought I could put it 3 or 4 times probably. But, so that hermeneutics of suspicion, the idea that, okay, if a man wrote this, why is he writing it in this way? And what does that mean about the women of that type, the women of the past, the women of the future? How is that tied to me today? And asking all of those questions and trying to tease all of that apart. So I'm kind of bringing a variety in, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of my natural doubt, putting it all in together for my framework. Findings? I was surprised and kind of disappointed. Yeah, I got done with my entire study and go, this was not what I was expecting to find. And it comes back down to that banchomarba word. Because what I found is a powerful woman who led her entire clan, who essentially was of some level of king rank. There's 7 layers of king. Based on everything I can calculate, she was at least the 3rd level from the top, maybe higher. She was a high-ranking woman. She ran a school that had at least at any given time 600 students. She ran raids in different countries, from what we can tell, and obviously different regions. And she got all of this stuff, she had all of these students, she was wealthy, and she vanishes. And from what I learned, she vanishes because she followed the male-dominated society's rules. Because she was a banchomarba. She had all of the power she needed to basically do whatever she wanted. But that wasn't what the society said she was allowed to do. And she vanishes. So I get toward the end and I start finding all these legal codes that says the designated daughter may do this, but she may not do this. And I'm going, well, that explains why I can't find her anymore. Because basically when she died, her children got none of the benefits from her material. Her clan did. Her family as a whole got the benefits for everything she did. And she did everything in her life knowing that her children or herself were not going to benefit from that. So I was looking for this powerful woman that had been smushed under the ground by medieval male clerics writing bad stories about women of the ancient times. And I found that wasn't the only place that she was smushed under the ground. That was the case. Yeah, we got the middle-aged men again, there we go. Men of the Middle Ages, there we go, who are writing and who are writing about these powerful women, and you can kind of tell they're a little freaked out about the fact that they were telling stories about powerful women. That's a little weird to these men. But we also see that she was held down in her own time. 2,000 years ago, she was kept down because of society's rules, male-dominated, focused rules. And then even today, when we're looking at scholarship, there's a huge amount of books that any of the times you reference Scathach, like in encyclopedias of Celtic studies and things along these lines. Quite often you find it listed as a warrior goddess. So today, through the 1980s kind of forward, we start seeing a trend wherein this woman obviously had to be a goddess. She couldn't have been real. So even today, we're kind of denying the reality of who she could have been as a historical living being instead of as a supernatural, otherworldly being. So it's kind of this, I get done and I was like, it wasn't quite what I expected. I put a question behind disappointment because I'm not quite sure that that's the way what I feel about it. I'm really thrilled to have gotten through and created in my own head a full composition, if I would, of what she was and what she did. But it wasn't what I wanted her to do. And so it was fascinating to me when I got done. It was like, yes, but I wanted more. And I recognized that in myself as a scholar in the 21st century going, this is what I want to see happening. And then I recognized that that wasn't the reality of the situation. So it was a little disappointment for me personally, but that's part of what scholarship does. What have I accomplished? First, systematic, detailed study of Scáthach. I can't find any others, so I guess I'm the first one to do it. It provides an example for future scholars to use external text to draw missing details. This is what I did. We've got 4 stories discussing her. How do we create the rest of her story? Well, we're going to pull off the details and bring them out of other things, legal codes. Okay, so one of the things, for a great example of this, that always drove me nuts, Celtic traditions and all the way into my Appalachian roots have a huge focus on hospitality. There's a specific code of law that says you have to invite a person in and offer to feed them or let them spend the night before you're allowed to ask them what they're doing there. Okay, that's the way it goes. It's just hilarious. My mom visited my grandmother when she was quite old and had dementia. My mom was there into the 2nd day before she realized my grandmother didn't know who she was. But grandma was still making sure that she had the bed, the food, and everything else because that was the first rule, hospitality. It always drove me nuts because when we get to Cúailnge going to Scathach school, he's not welcomed hospitably. He's looked at rather non-hospitably. And it was always fascinating. Why is this the case? And so I happened to stumble upon an old law that says that hospitable requirement is only made for adults. Again, he had no beard. He wasn't old enough. He got to be treated like a little snot-nosed kid. By finding those laws, it started answering questions about how the story occurs. Okay, so she didn't have to treat him this way. He gets to go and have a son by Ify, Scathach's competition. But he then leaves the woman pregnant and goes away and doesn't take care of the kid at all. Well, that's because of marriage laws that occurred in this age. He was underage. She wasn't, he was. As an underage person, he has no requirements to take care of that child. So knowing that then, by looking at these legal codes, these external sources, we can start filling in the blanks to the actual stories. So that ties in, of course, how her story demonstrates the legal codes of the times, the legal codes of hospitality, the legal codes of warrior etiquette, the legal codes of the banchomarba, or the designated order. Implications, our legacy. Basically, I come up with the conclusion that essentially, when I got done with this, we kind of have a story that tells us we can go a couple different directions. We can try to break out of our patriarchal bonds, or we can continue to be, as I call it, well-behaved. Scathach was an amazing woman, but she was well-behaved. She followed the rules. And that's how come we lost her. So it's kind of that little, what legacy, that's when I got done. I got to the end and said, what legacy are we leaving? You know, this is what happened to her. Where are we at? All right, let's see, I had one more slide after question time. Oh, I have in my first part my acknowledgments, so I wanted you guys to see some of my acknowledgments. These are some of the people I thank for helping me with my work. In the front center, this is my mother, Joyce. My mom, Joyce, started dyeing her hair several years ago when one of my nieces was really little. And a few months ago, she decided that she was going to go back natural. And now it's a running joke. We never know whose white hair it is, if it's my dog's or my mom's. So I love this picture because when she did that, she just livened up. And she's just sort of, poof, she's back to who she is. It's very cool. My mom is 81 years old and still going strong and probably outdoes me every day. Over here, this picture at the bottom, this paper I could almost dedicate to my friend Dawn. My friend Dawn died before I finished my paper. She was one of my proofreaders, first and forward. She died of a massive kidney infection that she was not going to the doctor for or treating because she was too busy taking care of her kids. So she left 4 children without a mother because she was so busy focusing on them, she forgot to take care of herself. And that's kind of something I see a lot of in a lot of the women that I know, is they forget to take care of themselves. And I don't want more people to be lost like her. Other people I mentioned are some of my family members. My top picture is my brother Clark. He has MS and we have our bouts, our challenges. So the whole time I'm writing my dissertation, my mom's bringing in papers. Here, you need to file these medical forms for. I'm surprised some of those medical forms didn't end up in the dissertation. But my sister and her husband, my 2 nieces. I have more than that, but these are the ones that are there that are constantly kind of providing emphasis. And the ones that Mara see quite often, these are my pups. The funny thing was, I got Mononamon up here, turned 15 in January. And when I got him, I had, first of all, I had no idea it was going to live that long. I had no idea I was going to do anything with Celtic studies at all. I named him after one of my favorite gods, because I thought it was neat. A couple years ago, he was starting to get really old, so I got a couple of puppies. And this is Luke. He's named after a Celtic god. And this is Thora. Thora is the world's best digger. If you need any gardening done, let me know. But these guys have been wonderful because when I get too confused and looking at the research, and this book says this, and this says this, and how does it fit together, I would grab these guys and go for a walk. And that was just a little helpful energy sort of thing. So these guys all brought different aspects to my study. In weird sort of ways, in probably ways that we'll never figure out or know. But that's who I'd like to, in addition to my professors who obviously know what they're doing and help me out a great deal. So just wanted to put some faces. And then it's time for questions. Okay, did I make it time-wise? Yes. All right, I told you I could do it. I told you I could pull it off. All right.
Well, now it's time for the committee to ask some of our questions, and then we'll see if we have questions from the audience.
All right. I am going to, I know this is going to sound maybe weird. I don't know if it's weird or not. I'm actually going to come over here. I'm going to take a seat, and I'm getting my pen and paper out because I'm of the constant idea that when people ask me questions, I can learn stuff. So every opportunity, I got my pen and paper, and when you guys start giving me some really good ideas, I'm going to be taking notes.
Brian, are you still there?
I sure am.
All right, good.
Stay awake now.
Oh yeah.
I'll start off with a question, and then we'll go, then Alpha will follow, and then you'll have a turn, and then hopefully we'll have another round before we open to the people who are here. I guess, I actually want to ask you about your conclusion, but let's start. What you didn't tell us about was something I was intrigued with also. Well, let me start. Actually, what you didn't quite tell us was that what you discovered of who Scathach was. She was the greatest warrior of her time, a teacher of warriors. She was a visionary poet. She was a prophetess. She was a religious leader. that she was the banchomarba, so she was the king or chieftain of her whole clan, and a wealthy woman.
Right.
So, and that she had been probably married, and she had 2 sons and a daughter.
At least,
And
right.
So the portrait of her
Okay.
is what your findings were.
Right,
That, you know,
right.
who is she? This is who she was. And you discovered that, and that, I think, is part of your most interesting findings. And there was one word from her that meant she wasn't just a poet who recited the stories, but was a poet of illumination.
Right. The phrase is emberas pranasa, which means the light of insight, essentially. And there's for a file or a fethi, there are 3 required skills or ways of knowing the future. And from what we can tell of her story, she had one of those 3 ways, and that was the gift of prophecy. So what we can tell by that and the different story in the context, she had the ability to prophesy, and she did it in poetic form, which was the proper way of doing it. You couldn't just say, oh, I see something coming. It had to be in verse to be done correctly. So we know Scathach had this ability, and it would be almost sort of like what somebody said they have the gift of second sight or something like this. She had that ability formally, but there's no indication of her having either of the other 2 requirements of the professional clergy. So my conclusion with that is that she had this gift to speak with the gods, but she was not formally trained as a formal religious cleric. When I started doing more research and digging into this, I discovered actual legal code, again going back to the Brehon code laws, wherein a person of specific areas were limited to their career choices. As a king, essentially, which is what she was one of us, which means basically the high up secular people. As a result, she would not have been allowed to inherit any other job, so to speak. And in this time frame, upper class people inherited their jobs. So for her to have been a formal cleric, she would have been born into the Asnana clan side, or the religious cleric side, and she would have had to have training in that. So what most likely was going on here was that she had a natural gift that had she been born in the right social structure, she would have been put into the religious schools. But because she was born into the lords and kings side, she was, okay, you're now going to be a lord. So you may have the natural tendencies and the abilities, but you didn't actually necessarily have the training. So she had a little extra above that training as a warrior that she had. And to me it was fascinating because I always wanted to find out how that fit. And it fit because legally she wasn't allowed to go to the religious side. So she was doing it kind of as a, everyday personal thing, not a formal religion activity.
Okay, and then to the homeland of Scathach.
Ah, yes.
I think it was the fascinating research you did. There were 3 different possibilities, and you explored each one of them, and you came up with your own conclusion of most likely homeland.
Yeah.
And I think why don't you just explain some of that?
Okay.
Because the linguistic study I found is such an important part.
Yeah. So Scathach, in her story, Cúailnge goes east from Ireland into Scotland somewhere and through Scotland to go training the Scot. But where is that he's going? That was what I wanted to know. Where is he going to get this training? In the earliest editions, it says he goes through, he travels for several days through Scotland. It doesn't ever say he leaves Scotland at all. In the later editions, the editions that came out in the 1300s, we see that what happens is the stories change. The first edition is very simple and straightforward. The second edition, about 100 to 200 years later, has a huge amount more detail all of a sudden. And the theory is that it was taken from an oral story originally, and that's what it was, in that first writing down. And then they decided they were going to make it into a better story. And they added all these extra details. These extra details, that section includes this idea that Scathach was a Scapian. And she was from Central Europe, in the Alps somewhere. And when I started looking at this, I'm like, that's quite a range there of locations. So can we narrow this down a little bit? Can we figure this out? So one thing I did, of course, as a historian, is I wanted to go see where the earliest text said. And that still put her in Scotland. And it, to me, also made more sense for her to be in Scotland because we're talking about a time and a location where the people in Ireland and the people in Scotland would be speaking essentially the same language and following the same cultures. And we don't see any indication of cultural or linguistic problems between Culainn and his teacher. So that kind of seems a little more logical that they would have a connection. Could be a wrong assumption, it could be a right assumption, that I figure that if she's over in Scapia, she's probably not going to know Celtic culture very well. And we see a very clear knowledge of her understanding of Celtic culture through the traditions. So then I started looking at linguistics. If you are looking at Scotland today, there's an Isle of Skye that's located off the coast of Scotland between Scotland and Ireland. It's spelled S-K-Y-E. And Skye is today said to be the homeland of Scathach. There's actually a Middle Ages, 1400s roughly, I don't know if that's still Middle Ages, 1400s fortress remnants there called Scathach, or the Fort of Scathach. And so everybody's like, oh, she was from Skye. And a big part of this is the linguistics. Skye sounds a lot like Scathach, right? So, okay, pretty easy. So when I started looking into this and looking at the origins of the word, Scathach is a Gaelic word and means the shadowy one, based on the shadows. Skye, or Scathaig, is actually means the winged isle, and it's actually a Norse word, originating out of Scandinavian words. The word Skye, the name of the Isle of Skye, doesn't even come from Gaelic. So it's a lovely little, we're putting them together because to our ears later, they sound like they belong together. The fort named Scathach's Fort on the Isle of Skye was named that and built there by a clan that was living in that area who wanted to lay claim to the ancient myths, to lay claim to the ownership of that land. And so they got it, and it was the clan that got on this fort, and they're going to stay there, and then they're going to keep going. I got proof. I got my heritage here. So when I start looking at this, there's a clue in one of the earliest texts wherein Culainn talks to his fellow foster brothers and he says, we were basically bound to Scathach of the fair Elg, E-L-G. This is not a normal Irish word or even a Scots Gaelic word. E-L-G makes no sense linguistically. So I went looking to find Elg, either as a clan or as a location. And I wanted to see if I could find a corresponding clan or a corresponding geographic location somewhere in Scotland that would fit with. And I found two. And considering I did a pretty good geographical map, I even got maps to send over through AAA to make sure I could. I'm not kidding, I've done look at all of this. I love maps, so that's not a big deal. But I found these two. One was right across the edge from the Isle of Skye. I thought, oh, maybe I have to go back to Skye after all. And I started looking and researching, and it just really didn't quite match. The other is the city or the region called Elgin, which is on the east coast of Scotland, and it is has been known for years to be a very inaccessible area until they put modern bridges and things in. And a lot of the story about how Culainn travels and the territory he travels through would make sense to go to this area of Elgin. And it's fascinating because one of my conclusions that I come up with how we can fit Scathach in is if she happens to be what today we call a Pict, or one of the original people from Scotland. They would still have a mutually intelligible language between the Picts and the Irish. We know there were Picts among the Irish kings at this time. so this was a common changing of clans, almost, if you would. If we look at Elgin, we find some of our earliest Pictish writing or stone carving in this area that we find. There's a lot of little hints that make me think that that area needs to be explored in a lot more detail. That's one of the things future research. I'd love to go digging, and I think you did not have to be digging in Elgin's archives and old books there to see what we can find. But my instinct is that she was from the east coast of Scotland, kind of the border area between the lowlands and highlands.
Well, I'll pause there and tell us.
Well, before I start my question, I just want to commend you for this very unique study, a very important study to bring forth this figure that has not been studied. The transdisciplinary nature of your research is also very compelling.
Good.
In your conclusion, you talk about how she was not a role model because she didn't break the rules, or she didn't challenge the inheritance rules.
I guess I look at it kind of like she can be a role model for two different ways. She can be a role model if you don't want to break the rules.
Sure.
If you want to stay in the same pattern.
Within the system, yeah. But given the system the way that it was, just what would you have wanted to see?
I don't know. I guess, again, this is a 21st century woman looking back. That's
Right.
always in
Yes,
mind.
yes.
I would love to, you've got a woman that's got her own war band that's obviously several hundred people strong, including, according to the story, some of Ireland's greatest warriors. Cuchulainn wasn't the only one. Noyes and several others were said to have been trained by her. Hello? Take them and break them down and make your own kingdom. I mean, you've got the warriors. Why not use them? That's looking back. And, you've trained your sons as warriors. They'll take up the sides and they'll go with you and take on and become your own kingdom or something. That's kind of what I was hoping to find. I wanted to see that next step. And that's an unrealistic 21st century mentality looking back, I believe. Because there would have been so many reasons at that point that she could not have done that. But I wanted it.
Do you see parallels there with any powerful women today, like specific leaders or?
Oh yeah. I see that so often. It's almost like trying to pick out a specific one is not good enough. Pictures running through my face and everything. In the United States, any of our current politicians, female politicians, that are trying to put forward, let's get more women involved in politics, for example. If we get more women involved in politics, we're going to be able to change the system. But the system is set up so that we don't make that change. And so just looking at that, it's in a way we're kind of running parallels, just trying to get elected officials in the Congress, for example. I see, and I cannot recall her name, and I of course, off the spur of my head moment, I can't remember the country. We have a queen in a small African country, just this past year, made child brides illegal. The entire country, no longer allowed. Not going to happen. This is a woman that is using her power to make some major changes for her country. I want to see how that happens afterwards. We've got the law, we've got the legal system. Is this going to be a breakthrough? So we can find them in multiple little areas and different areas, or very big world stage areas.
So you would have wanted to see Scathach make some challenges to
yeah.
the inheritance system?
Yeah, I wanted to see her go for broke, and she did exactly what she was supposed to do according to the clan's rules and regulations.
Well, actually, we don't know how she ended up.
Well, I guess my conclusion is, because we've lost her, kind of she vanishes. She vanishes because she followed the rules. When she died, or when she was too old to fight, her everything that she'd earned legally would have resorted back to the clan. It would have gone to a close-ish male relative. So probably a second or third cousin that was a male, or possibly even about be like a second level uncle off. Might have been the next legal connection. So because she vanishes essentially and is out of the story, it seems to me that supports the idea that she follows the rules instead of trying to claim her own area. Because she's got, everything goes back to the clan, it goes back to whoever else was there. Another side evidence for that is the law system is a slight difference on the Pict side than on the Scots, which would be Irish at this time side, in that there was permitted some small inheritance. Let me rephrase this here. If a female married an outsider on the Picts, some of that property did go to the outsider's family, which was completely, totally prohibited on the Irish side. If Scathach was married or connected to an Irish family, then she would have lost her land after her death two different ways. So either way it goes, she lost everything after she was dead, had passed away. Legally, none of her children would have inherited. They were just on either side of either legal code, absolutely not going to get it over to their kids. So that's my conclusion as to why that she did behave, because she vanishes. I suspect that, looking at other stories, she would have been kind of demonized if she had tried to do otherwise. You're going to say, hey, that person's a bad person. You remember her because she did something wrong, or something like that. And we don't find that. Just kind of like...
Okay, Brian, your turn.
Okay. Hopefully this doesn't feed back too badly because I can actually hear myself.
You sound very good for us here.
Oh, okay, good. So hearing some of the things you've been talking about, which I think are great, but I wanted to go back to something that you had said earlier, and I believe it was in your lit review where you pointed out that your lit review was very short because there was virtually nothing. So that points out that you were first into a lot of this. And obviously you did a lot of work, a lot of interdisciplinary work, a lot of very complicated work. And that's great and it's very important. But since you are the first into much of this, thinking from the other direction, what do you consider to be the limits and the weaknesses of how your research has worked here, especially in terms of your, not just your understanding, but how it goes forward into the field?
I think I was fighting limits. I felt like I was fighting limits the whole time, based on there's just a limited amount of research or available for her. I'm hopeful that sometime in the future, with the digital renaissance, if we could, that's going on now, that we may actually find more versions of her story in some ancient manuscripts. A lot of the manuscripts, like the Book of the Dun Cow, which is the earliest one that her story is in, and that the Táin Bó Cúailnge is, a lot of these are part of manuscript collections in monasteries and universities in Ireland and in England, that the entire collection has yet to be gone through in the modern time. So there's huge numbers of these manuscripts that actually, we don't know what's in them. And they are slowly, very slowly being digitized and accessed digitally and cataloged and logged. And so right now, my limit, of course, is where else can I find information? Because I'm, I think it's a great way to go because I actually have some sort of written text I can work with, but it's not very much. I can't travel back in time and talk to these people and that sort of thing, so I'm limited on quite a few aspects on it, which creates a natural weakness in the research. This is why I had to go digging into the legal codes, into these other texts, into these other parallels, is to find some strength and some supporting evidence for what I'm seeing simply in the text. That creates a large amount of potential loopholes for other scholars to come and say, you didn't look here, you didn't look here. The bottom line is, I'm waiting for them to do that because that's more ways for me to learn and find more answers. I'm kind of limited, I kind of got stuck. You know, I got to the end of where I could go. I know I can go this way and research this a lot more. I know I can go this way and research this a lot more. But I stopped at this point, and let's see where I'm going next. Is there somebody out there that says, you forgot to use this book that I've never heard of before, or something like this? That opens a door for me to take into the next step. Future research, again, I want to see what other scholars have to say. I want them to pick it apart, because that's how I'm going to go to the next step. I have my own little ideas. I want to look at some of the linguistic tweaks a little bit more. I want to look at that Elgin a little bit more. I need a little bit more in the Brehon laws. There is one huge chunk of the O'Curry's work, which is about a 6-volume text on Irish laws. Obviously, I didn't get through the whole thing. I only got through 2.5 of the volumes before I started just jumping through the sections. And there's more. So there's so many other directions I can take this, just to find out a little bit more here and there. It is by no means the authoritative end of everything work, and I do not mean it to be that way. I mean it to be a starting point, and we'll go from there to see what happens next. So if I'm lucky, a few years from now, somebody's going to pop up a wonderful old edition of a manuscript that I'll be able to get a hold of and say, oh, that answered that question. I'm not going to hold my breath for that, but I'm hopeful. Did that hit your question there, Brian?
Yeah. If I can ask a quick follow-up, because you pointed out a couple of things that I thought were really great there, especially when you said, you expect someone will point out, you didn't look at this book or you didn't consider this. So the one thing that stuck out to me as a place that, being that this is a defense, I have to ask about a defense. Do you have the defense prepared for what I assume is going to be the inevitable and probably the easiest attack, that when you assume the Scathach is a real person, rather than a myth, rather than folklore, not necessarily converting her into a goddess as a disempowering assault, which is one of the things I thought addressed really well. But if I remember correctly, you do take it as baseline that she is a person that did exist. And I think that's probably the easiest and most initial place for pushback. Do you have a sense of how you work with that for the inevitable kind of pushback that you get from it?
I think my answer for that is actually using Banchomarba and Queen Boudica, because when I started researching some of these figures, I started finding real-life parallels in the historical record of what is essentially banchomarba. And so my biggest answer is, of course, we're never going to know for a fact, unless we can get a hold of a time machine, that any of these people are real existing human beings. But when we come and we have stories that say these people existed and this occurred, and we have circumstantial evidence around, and then we find other women who, historical records, by historical records, mind you, we are saying external records from other people, not from the people themselves, but that these other people said this type of person did exist and actively existed in this time frame. So that would be my main focus as far as the defense on that, her as an existing person rather than a mythologized human, is that she would not have been the only one. There were others that had this same life. And we know this from different historical evidence, Tacitus, for example, discussing some of these stories. So we know that we had this occurring. And why would there be any reason that this couldn't be the case now? So it's never going to be 100%, but that's going to be, that would be my first line of defense.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks for that good question, too.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think she addresses it in the dissertation, but for you to point it out is a major point of pushback. You know, Afi was a woman warrior. Queen Neb was had her own war band.
Right.
So it wasn't unusual for other women.
And as near as we can tell,
time.
both of those women would have also been banchamarbas.
Right, and had their own, were women warrior chieftains, and are considered historical. It might be that because Scathach was considered the best of the best, better than all the champions of Ireland, that she couldn't have been real,
Right.
you know, but had to be mythological and goes back to the goddess, a warrior goddess of the Celts. I think you could have given that more credence as a possibility, as more, you know, that there had been a nature warrior goddess and she developed, you know, she was empowering women to move in that mode within a warrior culture, and Scathach was seen as an embodiment of the goddess. You know, but that wasn't something that you explored. So, you know, I think you could have looked into the plausibility of the connection there before you rejected it because it was for the reason that you thought it was diminishing the human person and making her fiction rather than real. But I like your historicizing of her because I think you're probably correct on that.
If I could respond to that a little bit, what I found when I was looking into that goddess connection, and I didn't go into it very deeply in the dissertation, was that connection between Scathach and a goddess, being a variant of a goddess, seems to have developed in the 1980s. And it seems to be a modern twist on her story. And so it was like, for me to narrow down where I was focusing, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to go look at this other area. So that's why I didn't put a whole lot of emphasis on that, was when I started looking at where her story was developing, at what point that connectivity and driven from a warrior goddess and connecting her most specifically to the Morrigan tends to come very recent in her 2,000-year history, so to speak, which is fascinating to me.
I think the Brehon laws go back to 8th century BC, it's in the Iron Age, and there were, you know, there's evidence for an earlier goddess culture in the country, and that it persisted into the Brehon laws, which gave women a lot more rights than any place else in Europe at the time, according to my research, so that they were. I would say, you know, Scathach is a remarkable woman, an extraordinary woman, really a very rare woman who becomes as we call, temporary man or a standing man, but assumes all the privileges of a man for her lifetime, and in that way is not a typical woman, and in that way violates the norms of what it is to be a woman, but she still is confined by this inheritance law, which means that children can't inherit her lands, and they go back to the community who will then elect another male leader, because male leaders are the norm. Right. Yeah. And I think you know your conclusion really raises the dilemma that we all face today. You know, what do? Do we work inside the system to reform? Do we move outside the system to be revolutionaries? You know, do we work one foot in, one foot out? You know, these are dilemmas that feminists of all kinds face, you know. So I think it is a very evocative conclusion that you have. I like that you leave it as a dilemma.
challenging.
Yeah, I haven't figured the answer out.
Well, it's a very difficult question. And, you do say, how do you break out of a system that, is so stratified by class and military power, as well to some extent by gender, and transform it into a more egalitarian system. So I think, it's just, I was very intrigued by your conclusion and to a good place with it.
I thought it was a very difficult chapter for me to write, the conclusion. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that I didn't find what I wanted to find. And I had to find a way for myself personally to come to terms with that. And what do I see in my head, and how do I get that onto a piece of paper? And that was kind of a bit of a challenge for me. So.
Just if I can have, I'm not going to take another question, but I just want to make a comment of my own. I find it extraordinary, very rigorous scholarship, a lot of rational thinking, development of arguments on many points in order to draw out a picture of who Scathach was. And so I see it as a major contribution to Celtic studies, as well as to the study of Celtic women. It could be the kind of thing that would stimulate, off of Brian's question, further research. It's like, some of the archaeologists from Britain should read this and decide, I'm going to go do a dig at Eldon.
I would love for that to happen. I really would. I'd like to know. Yeah.
See if because they just found Richard III, and they've been finding.
They've just found a major Scottish kingdom from the pre-Del Rhea, so pre-600 CE, in Scotland that they knew existed, but they couldn't find it. They just found this within the last, 2 or 3 months now. And I'm reading this going, is it close? Is it close? Is it hers? Is it hers? So there's obviously no way that I can stop researching her and the connections, because it's become part of what I do, So every time I'm looking at that, I'm looking to see what else. And,
How do you see this group supporting you moving forward in your educational career?
I'm going to give you a really weird answer that you probably don't hear very often. I'm doing this because I love it. And so I work full-time as a director. I teach as an adjunct. I've often said my dream, my job, I work to support my teaching habit. That's what I do, And I'd love to try being a full-time teacher, because, I've taught up to 27 hours in one semester at the same time, at 4 different colleges, and done all of that adjunct thing. It would be neat. It's not a requirement of who I am. I love doing what I'm doing. I'm perfectly happy doing what I'm doing, and I like the freedom to be able to research stuff that I want to research. So for me, this is being part of who I am and enjoying my growth and learning experience. It is not meant to set a stage for a major change in my life or anything. This is part of me. And so, if anything, it's just, I don't know, I don't want to call it a hobby, because it's a little more invested than that, but it's my love, it's what I like to do. And when I was a little kid, I said I was going to be a doctor, and so I'm determined to get there, and I'm going to beat my niece at it. My niece is about 2 years away, so I'll be the first doctor in my family. That's okay. I achieved that goal. I've done that. Now I'm going to go find something more. So it's purely personal for me, and it's what I wanted to do, and I found a topic I love. I've got to this point, and I'm not sick of the research yet, so I think I'm going to be sticking with it for a while, and just let it be who I am. So that's what it's about for me. It's about me. I'm being selfish.
Well, it'll make a contribution to the larger world at the same time. So, any questions from the audience?
I think.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Do a couple more.
Yeah. So, first of all, I wanted to say that your passion for the topic really came through in your work as well as your presentation. And it's always lovely to see that, to access to the material. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about Scathach's spiritual role, because it was rather unique that she was both a warrior and had this gift of prophecy, or also played a spiritual role. Can you say a little bit more about that and how that adds to our understanding of women's spirituality?
That was one of the things I really wanted to know more about, because how is it that we have a teacher, a warrior, obviously a king, by this point we figured this out, and a prophet, all in one figure. And that's kind of challenging, especially when I started looking, because to be in a king, you've got to be in the upper class. And to be in the upper class, it's very stratified society and limited with what you can and can't do. To be a professional religious cleric at this time requires specific training for a set number of years. To be in a phylake, which would be the prophet section, there's 7 layers of phylake from the lower level all the way up to the highest level called ulam, or professor. I always thought that was cool. The highest level druid or the highest level phylake or bard was a professor. That was kind of neat. So, in order for her to be a warrior and a king, she could not have been professionally trained as a cleric. We know from the stories that women were professionally trained as clerics, as well as judges, as well as different levels within the artisans' classes. So we know that was possible, and it just wasn't the case with her. But what we see is a woman who did not allow the professional class, okay, this is what you got, period, you're not allowed to touch it. She continued on with her natural traits, her natural skills. So if we look at it between a formal and a folk, if you will, religion, the formal religion is the class stratified, the druids, the bards, and all of these guys, and these focus and rules and regulations and ranks and hierarchies and the number of spells that you had to know in order to be this level and all of this. All of that rule and regulations over here in this formal side. And then we have what I like to say the everyday normal person. The person with their own personal spirituality. And I came to the conclusion that that's where Scathach was. She has some special skills, some gifts from the gods, but she's not formally trained, but she didn't let that lack of formal training keep her from being a spiritual being. And she kept that connection, that ability to prophesy. And apparently, her skills were pretty good because she was apparently known outside as being a prophet. So it fascinated me because that means that the formal religion didn't necessarily say absolutely not to the informal religion. So they were, from everything I could tell, they existed side by side. And she was allowed to maintain her natural ability, and she embraced it and went with it. And to me, that's inspiring, I guess. Maybe that's part of that question mark or that disappointment for me, because that's inspiring to me. I'm not part of a formal religious structure, but I want to have the freedom to be my own spiritual being, and I saw that in her. And this was, okay, this time of day I'm going to go talk with the gods. All right, good for you. That's good job. We like that. I don't have to go to the priest to make a sacrifice. I'm going to go talk to the gods on my own. And that was neat to see that in there. One translation that I found said that she had poets waiting to join her school. And I can't tell you how many weeks trying to find supporting evidence for that one translation, because that would have been incredibly significant. If she had poets waiting to join her school, it would indicate that she was training poets as well as warriors. That would have changed her entire essence. And I was waiting. I looked and I looked and I looked, and I could only say that the person that made that translation in 1967 didn't quite have it right. Because no other translation has that in there. And when I go back and I look at the Irish, I don't find it in the Irish either. So the only thing I could come up with was that was a little literary license because she prophesied in poetic form. That obviously she must have trained poets too. So that's again the importance of pulling multiple sources and the importance of going back to the original text if you can find it and doing that digging. But I wanted that really badly, and I was very disappointed when I could not support that, because that would have contradicted those rules of inheritance and those rules of who can do what type of school. And it didn't. So the oldest text doesn't say that. So, and it makes much more sense that she was a trainer of warriors, period.
Yeah, the thing you raised about her spiritual life, I think, is important as well. And you may want to, just occurred to me, you may want to loop that into your conclusion as something significant about her, particularly from a woman's spirituality lens.
I just wrote that down as a suggestion.
Thank you. We'll both write it down, we'll remember it then, right?
Okay, Brian, any other questions? Or if, actually, I do
No.
want, okay, good. So thank you very much. We'll turn to the audience then for any questions. Air.
I want to also commend you on the amount of field work and dedication that your dissertation.
Thank you, that means a lot coming from a library-based person.
So thank you so much. I think it's also a very good model for all the other students that are coming up, that I don't believe there's anything that can replicate doing the field work in terms of really immersing yourself, your topic, your spirituality, all of those components. Everything else is just kind of literature on a page. And it's very different than being at the site and doing your work. I would like, if you are interested in having a conversation with you, I have quite a few resources that come to mind and indexes relative to your lit review. So you're welcome. We can have a conversation later, and we can set up an appointment. I'll do some research before I come to the table, if you like. The one thing I did want to ask you is you showed the iconography of what looked like maybe a terracotta, large type of plate. It's the triple spiral, and I'm assuming at Newgrange that you are also aware of the triple spiral that is in front of the entrance before you go in. There's also in Giverny, the island in France, has an identical triple spiral that Newgrange does.
Okay, I remember which slide. I was going to pull it up here real quick.
I think it's the first slide.
Yeah, and it decided it's going to be silly to not show me my slide real fast. So I'm going to pop this.
I think for the triple spiral, to look at
Was it this one right here or
No.
a different one? Okay.
It's not in color,
Okay.
and it seemed to me like it was about 3/4 into your presentation.
Maybe this guy right here?
No,
The one with the dots?
there are 3 spirals that are in. Did you go to Newgrange? Have a chance to go to Newgrange?
I have not gone to Newgrange.
Ah, well,
Yet. Yes.
yes, because I think that's significant. No.
Okay.
And it's on, as I say, it's like a platter that it is on.
This maybe up here?
No.
Wait,
Was it up on the top?
Yes, on
I
the
think
top.
this one in your images, yes. I think
I have a similar one that's a little
there's
larger.
one that's just, yes, right there.
Yeah.
That's it, the triple
Right.
star. It's exactly the same as
So my
Newgrange.
necklace has got a variant of that on it.
Yes, and it's exactly the same as Newgrange, and the origin of the labyrinth is considered to be the spiral.
Right.
And the earliest representations, I think, are Egypt and Crete. So, and I have images of those that I'm very happy to give you if you. Thank you again.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite symbols, I think, because it's so old. When you're looking at Celtic studies, there's a trend to say everything is either Latinic-based or Hallstatt-based, and that's a differentiation between ages of designs in Celtic studies. That the fascinating thing is they don't apply in Ireland well. And so when I'm looking at it, it's a different story, and I think we've been invested as scholars in the Latinic versus the Hallstatt for about 150 years. We don't want to think about other approaches, but realistically, I think we really need to start looking wider approach instead of saying, oh, it had to be Central Europe. Well, take into account what's going on in the rest of Europe as well, and we might need to reorganize our archaeological timeline a little differently. And the locations of those spirals, actually the spiral itself and Newgrange all predate Celtic traditions, but they're in the area that later becomes what we call Celtic. And it's embraced by that tradition and that culture. It's still not going to be Hallstatt or it's Latin. So it's just this ancient, just feels nice and round. Yeah, alive. So thank you. I'm going to give you my card so we make sure we can. Who else? Who else? Come on. It's not like I like this or anything.
Comment is the research is fascinating, and this phenomenon of death and digging. So I love forensics. I was going right there with you. It's just so much fun just to go and just do that digging and then make discoveries and connections.
Right.
And you want to bring that forth. And there's some imagination and creativity involved because you like you said, you need time machine to go back and to be there actually. And one thing I found was interesting that the language is gender neutral.
It is. Certain ones are. Certain words are. Certain words aren't.
Okay.
But when we're looking at, and I have this whole big chunk translated out of Irish that was almost hurt my head to go through. But when we're looking at our oldest discussion of the word druid, it's not specific in Irish to gender. And it becomes specific to gender after we encounter, the Romans encounter and start bringing it in. And so we start engendering things. One of my biggest challenges in Irish is there's no verb of being in Irish. And I was raised speaking English. Some might say it's a second language. I've often said Appalachian was my first language and English was my second. But I was raised speaking English. I learned Spanish as my foreign language. I can read Spanish, French, Portuguese, and I dabble even in Romanian just to see if I could do it. I get to Irish and I go, what the heck? Because if you're saying, I'm thirsty, you can't be thirsty, there's no be. And so the words in Irish, when you're reading and you're trying to translate that line and to make it make sense in English, it's a little challenging for my Western head. And it's different little tweaks the language that I stumbled into that I was not expecting. That gave me a challenge. I liked it.
I have another question. One of the images you had, you said that there were heads embedded in what looked like a column or 3 columns.
Yes.
And you said that the Exegetical collected heads. Whose heads and why? Were they?
There's a couple different versions of this. One thing we do know from the Romans, this really freaked the Romans out big time. The Celts were fond of, and we know this in Europe as well as in the British Isles, of skull cups. So literally cutting off the head, cutting off right about here in the eyes, and making the top part of that skull into a nice drinking vessel. And it freaks us out big time. But guys, Tibetan Buddhists still do that today. So, okay, it's not completely unheard of, and it's just weird for us in the West, okay? But that was a way, the head was seen as the seat of the soul in the Celtic tradition. So when you had the head, you had control of that soul and that soul's energy. So what we see is, we see soldiers that they went up against that were really strong, and they beat them. So like, I'm taking you with me. You are now part of my army, that sort of thing. There was a Roman general that was apparently pretty good and pretty impressive in the particular Celtic tribe in Europe. Beat him, cut his head off, and he was so well revered, they actually electroplated, if you will, his skull in gold. The skull cup was gold plated for use, and that was a sign of reverence and respect for his ability. He was an enemy, but he was a good one. We have multiple stories of severed heads in Irish mythology. Bran was one of them. You guys know about the Tower of London, right? If the Ravens ever leave the Tower of London, the British Empire will fall. That actually started with a legend about a head being buried under that tower. And that head's power is where that comes from. And so we've got this idea of this person's spiritual essence being that foundation piece. That particular person's head traveled all over England and Ireland for about a year. Completely conscious, speaking and being fed and everything else, disembodied. But this according to legend, yes. I don't have historical evidence of that one either, I'm sorry to say. If I did, there'd be a whole other story going on there. So that head was revered, and it wasn't, as near as we can tell, it would not have been an ancestor. It would have been a competitor for most cases. So we do have to, in the legends, we have a little give and take, but when we're looking at the stories that the Romans are telling and things like this, it seems to be a way of almost controlling that energy that you took so much effort to beat. And if you were pretty good, apparently these people in that part of France were pretty good because they stored them on a display case. This is a trophy shelf. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, they have that one part of France had two different areas with these columns, and some of the skulls, fascinating enough, were carved skulls out of stone, and others were actual stone skulls set in there. So I guess if you didn't have enough skulls, you could just put a makeshift in. We also see a huge reverence of the head. We'll find statues of faces and of heads and everything all over different parts of the Celtic country. That's just the heads. Yes, here's the head. Woo! Okay.
Okay, were there
Anybody else?
burning questions?
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Just sorry.
No, that's all. I'm intrigued to learn more.
Oh, good.
Yes.
You can help me find my loopholes and keep going to the next step.
Yeah, there's so much more in there.
Oh, yeah.
It's fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Really so much more. Okay, well,
just a brief comment. I'm nowhere near dissertation, PhD status, but I just find it really encouraging that there are things that are still unearthable, quite literally, and still things revealing itself in history and herstory. And so to see just the immense amount of work that you've done, and not, and people touched on this earlier, but really bringing in other sources and figuring out the socio-political, cultural, historical context to sort of fill in these gaps and really get a sense of what was going on at the time. I really resonated with that and really appreciated that, and just well done, really.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You guys have been a wonderful audience. Thank you.
so now we have a 5-minute break, and that means you all leave the room while the committee has a very quick conference. And please come back in 5 minutes.
All right. I am going to. I'm going to sit back down in the hot seat.
No, you get to stand.
Oh, I can stand. Okay. I'll
I'm
stand.
going to put you through any more questions.
Nobody sits in front of a firing squad, Loleta. So.
After the last couple of years I've had, I can handle a firing squad. I'm sure of it.
Well, first of all, I want to say a special thank you to your mother.
Yes.
I know you dedicated your dissertation to her, and that her help and support and love has done a lot for you, and I want to pass our gratitude on to her.
Thank you.
And then I want to announce that you have passed. Spirituality scholars and become a new doctor of philosophy.
All right.
In spirituality. So congratulations.
Thank you. And you helped some everybody, right? Thank you.
Congratulations, doctor.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. That's kind of weird to hear said.
You did it. You become
wow.
a doctor now.
Wow, okay.
So,
Yes, I beat my niece. Oh, no.
so any special words?
Oh, my goodness. It's kind of weird because, you know, you're working for this for years and you know you're going to get there. And you know, I felt like I did well. These people worked well. Brian and all of these guys gave me great feedback and helped me get. So it's like, yeah. But then here in the moment, it's like, oh wow, I did it.
It's a huge accomplishment.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
You did so well. Really wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. So.
Good. Well, great. So everybody come up. We'll put her in the middle and have our group hug.
Yes. Yes.